This is purely a journalistic point of view. Nothing more has been said in this video other than that of which has been reported by various media sources and backed up with sources seen at the end of this video.
With WrestleMania 33 come and gone, it's difficult to imagine a world without WWE's flagship show. Not only has the Showcase of Immortals entertained millions of fans, but it's influenced many of today's wrestlers who came to love wrestling through watching WrestleMania. It's easy to think of WrestleMania as something destined to succeed, but as we shall see, WrestleMania was not a sure thing. Only through hard work and a little luck did the show succeed. Most of us have seen the WWE home video of the true story of WrestleMania, but there's a lot of information that has been omitted on how plans could have easily fallen through. Join behind the Titantron as we look at the real story of WrestleMania. In Sean Assel and Mike Mooneyham's Sex, Lies and Headlocks, they discuss how in 1984, Vince McMahon met with his inner circle to discuss a show he was proposing that would take the company to the next level. McMahon had seen the success of Jim Crockett Promotions' closed-circuit event Starrcade and wanted to one-up it. While Starrcade had been shown in several facilities on closed circuit, McMahon envisioned a show that would be transmitted to hundreds of locations. By running a show in one venue and broadcasting it to hundreds of others, the WWF could make millions. But as history has shown, he could lose it as well. McMahon's advertisers were justifiably worried, because Vince Jr.'s last two forays in closed-circuit television had been disastrous. This included both his screenings of 1974's Evel Knievel's jump over Snake River Canyon and the Muhammad Ali vs Antonio Inoki bout from 1976. Ticket sales for the 1976 show were dangerously low until Bruno Sammartino defied doctors' orders to wrestle, saving the show by main eventing the matches held along with the closed-circuit screening of Ali vs Inoki. According to a 2010 Connecticut Post story, the McMahons filed for personal bankruptcy in 1976 after amassing, according to the campaign, about $1 million in debt. That didn't stop McMahon, as he'd already shown by breaking long-standing taboos against encroaching on other wrestling territories. He was determined to become the king of wrestling, and as far as he was concerned, that meant airing a national show. WrestleMania was made possible largely by two things: the spread of cable television and the marketing genius of David Wolf in creating the Rock and Wrestling connection with Vince McMahon. Cable would allow a cost-effective method of hyping wrestling, while the Rock and Wrestling connection would make it mainstream. By the early 80s, wrestling promoters saw the potential of cable television in spreading out beyond traditional territories. In the past, promoters ran their show out of a certain region, advertising their matches by buying airtime on cheap UHF stations. However, Georgia Championship Wrestling, which aired on Superstation TBS, was able to reach across the United States on one station alone, allowing the promotion to run shows outside its traditional territory. Joe Blanchard's Southwest Wrestling had a similar arrangement on the USA Network, and actually ran a tournament to crown a world champion, with some believing Blanchard planned on expanding his promotion to the national level. Vince McMahon was not the first promoter to recognize the potential of cable television, but he was the first to seize it. Southwest Wrestling was believed to be USA Network's highest rated show, but when the promotion allegedly fell behind on paying USA, McMahon swept in, gaining access to USA Network. From there, he began airing Tuesday Night Titans, an eclectic show that featured wrestling matches, interviews on a third-rate Tonight Show set, and bizarre comedy sketches involving WWF stars. Some traditional fans felt it was blasphemous, but it was a ratings hit for USA. The Rock and Wrestling connection began with the wrestler's appearance in a music video. Cyndi Lauper's manager and boyfriend David Wolf, a wrestling fan himself, convinced heel manager Captain Lou Albano to appear in Lauper's music video, Girls Just Wanna Have Fun. The video's success saw Wolf entice McMahon with the idea of Lauper representing youthful wrestler against Albano's wrestler. The idea became the Brawl to Settle It All, a 23rd July 1984 main event that aired on MTV and became a hit for the rapidly growing music network, scoring its highest rating ever. The event also attracted celebrities such as Andy Warhol. Suddenly, professional wrestling was hip. Was it a fad? Perhaps, but lots of money can be made off fads if someone strikes while the proverbial iron is hot. The WWF had its popular champion Hulk Hogan, but no matter how popular Hogan was, Vince McMahon had to know he needed a heel that fans would pay money to see Hogan destroy. Enter Rowdy Piper, who had just spent several years in Jim Crockett Promotions and Georgia Championship Wrestling, first as a hated heel, then as a beloved babyface. Piper entered the WWF as a manager, reportedly due to injuries sustained in his fabled dog collar match with Greg Valentine at Starrcade 83. In 1984, Piper used his gift of the gab to get over through his talk show Piper's Pit, a segment he claims he told Vince to give him 3 weeks to succeed with. The angle where he broke a coconut on Jimmy Snuka's head propelled Piper to the most hated list, igniting a white-hot feud over the summer of '84 that Vince McMahon managed to sustain through the inclusion of the Tonga Kid when Snuka's substance abuse problems forced him into rehab. The WWF had its babyface and heel ready for a main event. Now it was time to draw the fans in. Vince's dream of a national show wasn't going to plan though. Ticket sales were so low that the WWF hadn't raised enough money to cover the cost of the deposits on the 200 theaters they'd rented to show WrestleMania. As a result, the WWF hired public relations company Bozell and Jacobs to hype the event. In hindsight, it was one of the key factors in WrestleMania's success. Next, McMahon tapped into the MTV success. MTV was happy to air a wrestling show as it had done great ratings. McMahon saw 2 shows, one event to hype a big match and one featuring the match itself. Of course, being wrestling, the big match would only be a sample to entice fans to buy what would become known as WrestleMania. The result was an awards ceremony at Madison Square Garden where Cyndi Lauper and Captain Lou Albano were recognized for their work in raising funds for a multiple sclerosis charity. The WWF had Albano turn face thanks to a storyline where Albano and Lauper reconciled through their charitable efforts. Naturally, being wrestling, someone crashed the award ceremony. In this case, it was Rowdy Piper who smashed the award over Albano's head, power slammed David Wolf, and kicked Lauper in the head. Hulk Hogan ran in for the save, but in true wrestling fashion, the damage had already been done. The attack was shown on MTV in a seemingly endless loop, treated as the 80s version of the Kennedy assassination. This led to Hulk Hogan facing Rowdy Piper in Madison Square Garden on the 18th of February 1985 in a match nicknamed The War to Settle the Score. This show aired on primetime on MTV, demonstrating the WWF's rising clout amongst Hollywood and the music industry. TV and film stars such as Joe Piscopo, Danny DeVito, and artist Andy Warhol were but a few on hand to watch the spectacle. The match saw Hogan defeat Piper after disqualification when Paul Orndorff interfered. The real story though was Mr. T's involvement in the match, where he rescued Cyndi Lauper from a beating when she tried to stop Piper and Orndorff from double-teaming Hogan. Mr. T in turn would get a beat down for his heroics, setting up WrestleMania's main event. As Hulk Hogan recalls in his autobiography Hollywood Hulk Hogan, the public relations campaign was growing taxing. According to Hogan, he and Mr. T were finished with their publicity campaign, but suddenly told they had to appear on comedian Richard Belzar's show Hot Properties, as there were dozens of kids in wheelchairs waiting for the Hulkster and A-Team star. Upon arrival, the kids were nowhere to be found. Once Hogan appeared on the show, Belzer egged Hogan on, questioning wrestling's legitimacy. A frustrated Hogan put Belzer in a headlock, accidentally knocking him out and Belzer cracking his head on the floor. Hogan apologized, but a miserable Mr. T chimed in, "Hell, that fool deserved what he got. Hulk Hogan is a champion of the world. What's wrong with that idiot?" Belzer sued, and an out-of-court settlement was reached for an undisclosed sum, with Belzer reporting building a farmhouse in France that he nicknamed Chez Hogan. As the saying goes, there's no such thing as bad publicity, as seen by the aftermath of the Hot Properties show. In Sex, Lies and Headlocks, Bozell and Jacobs employee Vince Robertelio remembers the Belzer incident. At that point, I don't think you could have gotten any more press than we're getting. And yet they did, as the Belzer debacle led to Hogan and Mr. T being invited to guest host Saturday Night Live, the eve of WrestleMania. Their Saturday Night Live appearance is credited with bringing in lots of last-minute viewers the day of the show. Mr. T provided lots of publicity, but he came with baggage. There was heat with wrestlers who felt offended a celebrity was participating in wrestling. Piper and Mr. T got off to a bad start when Piper grabbed T's head during a promo. This led to a later scuffle where Mr. T dove at Piper, knocking him off a stage. Mr. T's tantrums continued through WrestleMania when Mr. T was nowhere to be found and he was lounging in his hotel room. Later that day, Mr. T threatened to no-show the event when his entourage wasn't let into Madison Square Garden. Hulk Hogan was finally able to work things out, and Mr. T and his entourage were allowed in. The reality is that Vince McMahon gambled everything he had on WrestleMania. In the WWE documentary, McMahon says he gambled everything on a throw of the dice. Had the show failed, the World Wrestling Federation could have gone belly up. Indeed, Roddy Piper remembers seeing Vince pacing the halls of Madison Square Garden. The aura of excitement and nervousness was getting to the WWF head honcho, and he looked like a deer caught in the headlights. This was one of the first times I had seen McMahon as white as a ghost and at a loss for words. Of course, WrestleMania was successful, and there doesn't appear to be an end in sight, but how could WrestleMania 1 have failed? Well, be sure to tune into tomorrow's video to find out. We hope you enjoyed this video. Be sure to leave your comments below, leave a like or dislike, subscribe if you already haven't, and I'll see you next time with some more wrestling content.